Stephanie Dobson is back with us once again this week as we continue to talk about going through the divorce and separation process. Stephanie is a lawyer and mediator here in Lloydminster with Hanka Divorce Law and Mediation. So Stephanie, today we're talking about one of these things that pops up always in Lloydminster, and it's the cross-border issue. So no different for the divorce and separation side of things. So what's the difference with how separation is dealt with, Stephanie, based on which side of the border you live on in the Lloydminster area?
So there are parts of divorce that are federal, and there's parts of divorce that are provincially regulated. So when we talk about the capital D divorce, so going from married to legally unwed, that is actually federal. So frankly, it doesn't matter which province you're in. So issues like child custody, child support, well, we call child custody now something different, but decision-making responsibilities, parenting of the children, child support, spousal support, that legislation is all federal. Now, depending on which province you live in, the treatment may be slightly different as to how they apply those issues, but the legislation itself is federal. Now, the division of your assets and debts, that is going to be different for each province. So whether you're married or just living together, it's completely different legislation from that federal divorce legislation.
So let's get to that a little bit further, Stephanie. So is there a difference if you are living together versus if you are actually married?
So again, there's the provincial legislation versus the federal legislation. So if you're married, we're looking at the Federal Divorce Act. If you're unmarried, we're looking more at the provincial legislation. So we talked a moment ago about property division. So property division is always dealt with under the provincial legislation. So in both Alberta and Saskatchewan, married couples will always fall under that provincial legislation called the Family Property Act. Actually, both provinces have the same name of the legislation. And that helps determine their right to divide their assets and debts on separation. Now, that same legislation also applies to some unmarried former couples in both provinces. So, of course, there's legal definitions around whether that's going to apply to you or not. But basically, in Alberta, the unmarried couples are called adult interdependent partners. And in Saskatchewan, they're called spouses. So anyways, we won't get into the details of that, but you really have to fall under certain categories and have lived together for a certain length of time and have certain hurdles you go over if you're unmarried, but definitely it applies to unmarried people in both provinces.
Well, what are some of the issues that can be created, Stephanie, if there is a move post-separation? And as you know, especially in Lloydminster, it's very easy to move from one side of the border to the other. So what issues can be created because of that?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's lots of times where people will come into me and they say, "Well, I've rented a house on the Saskatchewan side or on the Alberta side," and okay, well, where was your family home? Oh, it was on the other side. So it can create some issues. So let's just talk about when you apply for a divorce. So a divorce, although you don't have to physically be present in court, we've talked in other episodes about negotiation processes to keep you out of court, but to become legally unwed, you have to file papers in court, in a superior court in one of the provinces. So in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we've got the Court of King's Bench, of course, which was formerly known as the Court of Queen's Bench. So in order to be eligible to apply for that divorce, that capital D divorce in one of those superior courts in either Alberta or Saskatchewan, one of the spouses has to have been resident in a particular province for 12 months. So it doesn't have to be both spouses, it just has to be one. So if one of the spouses has recently moved to Saskatchewan, say, but the other spouse still lives in Alberta, then we can still apply to Alberta for the divorce. The problem can really arise if both spouses move to wherever, right? So both spouses say move to Saskatchewan and they used to be residing in Alberta, then we have to wait until someone's been resident in a province for that full 12 months before we can actually finalize the divorce. Even if that 1 year of separation has already passed, it doesn't matter. There's no jurisdiction until you've actually been residing in that province for that year.
Now, does it further complicate things when you're going to hire a divorce professional? And, in regards to the provincial boundaries, does that make a difference as well?
This cross-border thing, there's so much that's complicated around it. So, of course, the answer to that is going to be yes. Everything's complicated with cross-border. So, the lawyers are regulated provincially. So, when you're inquiring at a law office, if you can use their services, especially when we're here in Lloydminster, we're going to ask, what the applicable province is. Now, if you're somewhere like Edmonton or Saskatoon, the law office is probably going to assume, okay, this is probably a Saskatchewan matter, probably an Alberta matter. But the lawyers in Lloydminster, most of us are registered in both provinces because, of course, we generally have cross-border clients. There's some other centers close to Lloydminster where the lawyers are also duly registered, but you may be surprised to know that there's some lawyers, for example, in our area that might be registered in British Columbia, or lots of Alberta lawyers are also registered in the Northwest Territories. They have a big shortage of lawyers in the Northwest Territories physically. And so lots of Alberta lawyers can actually practice up there. So if you have cross-border issues, of course, it's just good to be mindful, I suppose, of your divorce practice. The last point I'll make is that the Law Society has made what's called the National Mobility Program, and that actually allows lawyers to practice temporarily in another jurisdiction. So I could, for example, take on an Ontario case as an Alberta or Saskatchewan lawyer for certain sort of, one file or for a certain number of hours in a year. It's all very highly regulated, but there are some exceptions where we could help even if it's not in our province, but laws are different everywhere. So we always have to make sure that we're competent before we can do that.
All right, Stephanie. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again. So much information surrounding this. It seems like, every week we stir up this hornet's nest of new and different complications. So thanks for clearing it up a little bit, and we'll chat with you again next week.
Thanks, Stacey.